What's up, ladies and gentlemen, Triple Cap here, and today I'm going to do something I haven't done in a while. I made a video maybe about 2.5 years ago about, some tips to help you out with FPV. And I was pretty much a noob myself when I made the video, so I didn't know what I was talking about, but I was trying to give a perspective from a noob, basically, and I was pretty much a noob, and now I've got about 3.5 years under my belt, so I feel like I've got a little bit more that I can offer. But to be honest with you, some of these tips are very similar and very much the same. So this video is 15 tips for anyone that's thinking about getting into FPV. So let's get started. Tip number 1. The first thing you should do before you even consider about getting into this hobby, don't jump right into ordering your parts and ordering your quad and all. The first thing you should do, find out what the restrictions are, understand what the current FAA regulations are. There are certain ones that you're going to want to know about. There are certain things that you can and can't do. There are certain requirements that you sometimes must meet before you can even launch your drones. So it's important for you to at least know what these laws and regulations are. So the very first thing you should do is go onto the internet, do a little bit of research, understand what these laws, these limits, and these restrictions are before you do anything further. Tip number 2. Again, before you go ordering a bunch of parts for your drone, the first thing you're going to want to order is a radio. Whether it's a Taranis QX7, whatever radio you're going to get. I use a QX7, that's what I'm familiar with, so that's what I'm mentioning. But do some research, look into the radios, pick you a nice radio that's going to work for you and what you intend to do with it, and go ahead and order it. That's the very first thing that you should order. So what good is a radio going to do when you don't have your drone? Well, that's a good question, and this is the main part of tip number 2. You're going to want to start by practicing on a simulator. You're going to go download Liftoff, the DRL Sim, one of these simulators that let you, from your computer, the safety of your home, without having to worry about damaging your quad in the first time you take off or anything like that. You're going to download a simulator, get on that simulator, and just put lots and lots of time into it. Put lots and lots of time. Make sure you practice the simulator in acro mode. Don't put the simulator in self-leveling mode. So that's tip number 2. Get you a radio, a transmitter, and then download a simulator. This is going to save you money, it's going to save you time, it's going to save you a headache after headache after headache, because if you went ahead and just bought the drone and built it and take it out on your first try and you crash it into a tree or get it stuck or damage something, then you're just out of money and you're going to have to wait. So get the simulator, practice on that. All right, tip number 3, the moment you've been waiting for, it's time to order your parts. If you can, I highly recommend you spare no expense. It'll be very tempting to buy these really cheap parts, and some of them are okay. Don't get me wrong. I use a lot of cheap parts myself. I fly on a budget. I'm a budget flyer, so I buy cheap stuff, but I know what to get. I know what works, and I know what doesn't. So in the very beginning, when you're making your parts list, I'd avoid places like Banggood. I would stick with something like RHCP Quads, the Rotor Riot store, even Get FPV is pretty good. Order your parts, spare no expense. You're going to need a frame, you're going to need a flight controller, you're going to need ESCs, you're going to need a VTX, you're going to need a receiver, you're going to need a FPV camera, you're going to need props, you're going to need an HD camera if you expect to take HD footage, and you're going to also need goggles, FPV goggles, and that's one of the biggest expenses right there, because you could end up paying anywhere from $300 to $700 depending on what route you go. Like I said, spare no expense. You'll thank me later. And if you can't afford it, I would suggest checking out UAV Future's YouTube channel. He's got several videos about cheap builds, budget builds. Most of the things that he suggests are pretty trustworthy. So I think you could probably find one of his build videos and build a parts list off of that. So that's tip number 3, spare no expense if you can't afford it. All right, tip number 4. You got all your parts ordered. That's awesome. It's on its way. It's, being processed, being shipped. That's great. In the meantime, there's something you're going to want to do. My tip number 4 is for you to go onto YouTube, look for this guy named Joshua Bardwell, and watch every single one of his videos. I'm just kidding. Don't watch all of them. But you're going to want to watch some of them. There's a software that we use. It's called Betaflight. You're going to want to get yourself somewhat familiar with it. I just really highly suggest you take an evening of binge watching YouTube and learn as much as you can about beta flight, about building quads. You're going to want to spend as much time as you can trying to absorb some of this knowledge, because I mean, no matter how much you watch, you're probably going to find yourself doing a little more research as you're trying to build this thing. But the more you've got inside of your brain when it comes down to building the quad, the better off you're going to be. But that's tip number 4. Just watch a bunch of YouTube videos. Joshua Bardwell, UAV Futures. Just hop onto YouTube, do a little search for beta flight, for drone build. You know, just sit back, watch these guys at work, and you'll be better off for it in the end. That's tip number 4. Watch a lot of YouTube videos. A lot. No matter how much you watch, it's not going to be enough, but the more you watch, the more prepared you're going to be when it's time to build. Tip number 5. All right, you've got your drone, all your parts have come in, everything's there, and you're ready to build. Tip number 5 is kind of a safety tip, and that safety tip is never do anything, never plug your quad in. Never, ever, ever, ever plug your quad in or do any work when your quad is powered up if your props are on. Always make sure it does not have props on when you're working on it, because you could plug that thing in and all of a sudden it goes crazy. It happens. People have the scars to prove it. So tip number 5 is all about safety. I don't want you losing any fingers before you even get to use them. Before you ever plug it in, take your props off. And this goes for even in the future, later on when you think you've got it all figured out. Always take your props off, because you never know when something's going to screw up and the thing's going to go haywire and it's going to cut off your fingers or your arm or your neck. Who knows? So that's tip number 5. Never power up with your props on. Ever. Ever. Ever! All right, tip number 6. This is more like something to prepare yourself mentally. And that is, do not expect this to be easy. Do not go into this thinking you're going to nail it the first time. Don't get discouraged. This is going to be hard. It's going to take time. If you follow tip number 2 and you've practiced on a sim, you're going to have a leg up, which is great, but it's still not quite the same. There's some differences between playing it on the computer, doing it in real life. There's so many other factors that come into play, like your nerves. I mean, there's just a lot more. It's different. I've been flying for 3 years now, a little bit over, I think, and I'm not anywhere near where I want to be yet. So be patient and expect this to be difficult. Tip number 7. On your very first flight, your very first FPV flight, you're going to want to have a good location. You need to give yourself plenty of room to maneuver and move around and just fly and get used to everything. And for that reason, I suggest a big open field of some kind. You need a location that's got plenty of airspace where you can just fly around and get used to your quad. That's tip number 7. Tip number 8. You may be tempted to put on auto leveling. Don't do it. I mean, you can, and you'll be okay. You'll if you do use auto leveling, and it may even help you a little bit for starters. But I highly suggest you start in acro mode. The problem with self-leveling mode is how the sticks are used. In self-level mode, you would hold your positioning of the stick. Rather than in acro mode, if you hold the position of your stick, you'll continue to do flips or rolls or whichever way you're holding it. You don't do that. You would recenter the stick. So make sure you start off in acro mode. If you do start off in auto level mode, it's not the end of the world. It'll just take a little bit of practice to get used to actual acro mode. All right, tip number 9. You got your quad out. You got it in acro mode. You're ready for your first flight. Tip number 9 is fly forward. Don't try to hover. Always be moving forward. Always be progressing towards wherever your camera is pointed. Always be aimed forward and trying to move forward. The reason I tell you to do that is because it's easier. It's much easier to try and keep moving and just turn the quad as you wish rather than try to stay in one spot. Fly forward. Always move forward. Forward progression at all times. Keep flying forward. Get used to it. Get used to making left turns. Get used to making right turns. But always be moving forward. When the time comes, sure, you can practice hovering, but starting out, I highly recommend you always move forward. Tip number 10. Tip number 10 is practice. Tip number 11 is practice. Tip number 12 is practice. 13 practice, 14 practice, 15 practice. That's it. There's my 15 tips, but the last 5 are all practice. Practice is what's important. Get out there as much as you can. Fly as much as you can. Once you get comfortable in doing one thing, try to do something else. You're going to crash. You're going to explode. You're going to fail. You're going to want to give up. Don't. Keep practicing. Keep pushing. If you break your quad, order parts. Get it back in the air. Order extra parts in case it breaks again. This is a skill that takes people years. Like I said earlier, it could take you years and years and years to be really good. It could take years. Some people have been doing this some people are better than others. Don't get me wrong. Some people could pick it up in the first few months and be amazing within their first year. But for most people, I believe it takes a little bit longer than that. It takes a lot of dedication. It takes a lot of hours on the sticks. And practice is the biggest tip that I can give you. That's why it covers tip number 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. Practice is the most important thing. As long as you're practicing, you're learning. As long as you're practicing, you're getting better. That is the key tip right there. Practice. Don't give up. Keep pushing yourself all the way. So just always practice. And once you get comfortable, change it up. If you're flying in an open field, you get comfortable with that, try a different location. Try a more close quarters type location with some obstacles. Start learning to fly around things. Start learning to fly under things. Shoot some gaps. All of this is going to challenge you, and the more it challenges you, the better you're going to get. One of my biggest mistakes is I used to fly in an open field, and that's all I ever did was fly in an open field. I didn't want to go into trees because I've been stuck in trees, so I avoided trees. What I learned is I need to go near those trees. I need to interact with them. I need to see what it feels like to maneuver around them. And the more I did it, the better I got at it. And I'm, like I said, 3 years in, I'm not amazing, but I'm much more comfortable than I was 2 years ago. If you take anything from any of these tips, take this. It's not going to be easy, but with practice, you can achieve your goals. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's all I have for you tonight. Those are my 15 tips for the new FPV pilot thinking about getting into this drone world, this hobby, this crazy hobby that is FPV. One thing is for sure, if you do get into it, you will never regret it. You will be tried, you will be tested, you will become frustrated, you will get angry, but you will love it. Guaranteed. I hope these tips help you guys, and if you like this video, if you think it's going to help you in any way, shape, or form, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. I post videos almost every day. Mostly it's just me flying around and doing my thing, but every now and then I'll throw some other stuff on here too. So happy flying, guys. I appreciate you watching, and until next time, Caps out.